My name is Isabel Chen, I'm 29 years old, and my entire understanding of who I am was rewritten in the 10 minutes before I walked down the aisle on my wedding day. I've had years to process what happened in that bridal suite, years to understand the implications of what my mother told me, years to come to terms with the fact that the man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me to school every day of my childhood, who cried when I graduated high school, who'd been preparing to walk me down the aisle on the most important day of my life. That man was not actually my biological father. But in that moment, standing in my wedding dress with my hair and makeup done perfectly, with 200 people waiting downstairs to celebrate me, with my fiancé waiting at an altar, I understood nothing except that everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. To understand what that moment meant, you have to understand what my relationship with my father was like before that day. Robert Chen had always been my father. He was the person I ran to when I scraped my knee. He was the person who taught me to tie my shoes, who read me bedtime stories, who attended every school play and every soccer game and every recital. He was the person who picked me up from school every single day of elementary school, who knew the names of all my friends' parents, who was present in every meaningful moment of my childhood. I was an only child, which meant that I was the entire focus of my parents' world. My mother was a teacher, high school English, and my father was an accountant. They were not wealthy people, but they were stable and loving and devoted to making sure that I had everything I needed to succeed. My mother would say that she loved my father more than she loved anything, and that the only thing that came close was her love for me. My father, when people would ask him about his proudest accomplishment, would always say that it was raising me. I remember being in second grade and being asked by my teacher to bring in a picture of my family. I brought in a picture of my mother and father and me at the beach. I remember being so proud of that picture, so sure that my family was normal, that everyone had a mother and a father and a child, that this was how the world worked. I remember not understanding why some of my classmates had 2 moms or 2 dads or only one parent. I remember thinking that my family was the correct version, the way families were supposed to be. My father was a quiet man. He wasn't the type to be overly emotional or demonstrative with his affection, but his love was constant. It was in the way he looked at me, the way he made sure I was safe, the way he supported every decision I made, even when he didn't understand it. When I decided I wanted to take piano lessons, he drove me to every lesson, even though he didn't understand music. When I wanted to join the debate team, he helped me prepare even though debate wasn't his thing. When I decided to go to college far away from home, he cried, but he helped me pack, and he drove me to school, and he never made me feel guilty for leaving. Throughout my teenage years, I knew that my father loved me unconditionally. I tested that love many times. I had boyfriends that he didn't approve of, and he didn't forbid me from seeing them, but he made his concerns known. I made decisions that he thought were foolish, and he let me make them and learn from them. I went through a phase where I was angry at my parents, where I thought they were too strict or too controlling, and he weathered that anger with patience. He was always there. He was always my father. My fiancé, Daniel, had met my father before we got engaged. Daniel asked my father for permission to propose, which was something I didn't know about until after the engagement. When I found out, I was annoyed. I felt like I was capable of making my own decisions about marriage without my father's permission. But my father later explained that asking my permission wasn't about getting permission. It was about showing respect to the man who'd raised me, about acknowledging that my father's blessing mattered to Daniel and to him. When he said that, I understood, and I felt the weight of love in it, the weight of tradition and family and continuity. So when my father said that he would walk me down the aisle, it felt right. It felt like the natural conclusion to a lifetime of him being present for every important moment. Walking me down the aisle was supposed to be his moment too, the moment where he would hand me off to Daniel, where he would be acknowledged as the man who'd raised me and prepared me for this next phase of my life. The wedding was planned meticulously. My mother had been involved in every decision. She'd helped me choose the dress, pick the flowers, select the venue. She'd been present and supportive and loving throughout the entire planning process. She'd cried happy tears when I said yes to Daniel. She'd told me that she was so proud of me, that she was so excited to see me get married, that she wanted everything to be perfect for me. The morning of the wedding was a blur of activity. I got my hair done at a salon, then came back to the bridal suite at the hotel where we were getting married. My bridesmaids arrived. My cousin Sarah, my college roommate Jennifer, my best friend from high school, Emily, and my mother's best friend, who'd been like an aunt to me my whole life, Aunt Patricia. We spent the morning getting ready, doing makeup, taking pictures, drinking champagne, laughing about nervousness about the ceremony. Everything felt normal. Everything felt like a happy bride preparing for her wedding day. My mother came in and out of the suite throughout the morning. She was coordinating things with the wedding planner, checking on my father, making sure everything was running on schedule. She looked beautiful in her mother-of-the-bride dress, a navy blue that complemented her dark hair. She looked happy. She looked proud. I remember thinking that I wanted my mother to always look as happy as she looked that morning. Around 11:30, my bridesmaids took a break. They went downstairs to get coffee and to check on things for the ceremony. My mother had been in and out, but she came back in around noon, and she asked if I wanted to have some alone time before the ceremony. I said yes, and my bridesmaids left to give us privacy. My mother closed the door, and she asked if she could sit with me for a few minutes. I was sitting at the vanity in the bridal suite, still in my undergarments, my hair half up in the style my stylist had created, my makeup done. The dress was hanging on a special hanger near the window, waiting for me to put it on. I was in that in-between state where I wasn't quite ready yet, but I was close. I had maybe 45 minutes before I needed to be fully dressed. My mother sat down beside me at the vanity. She took my hand. She was quiet for a long time. I could see her in the mirror, and I could see that she was emotional. Her eyes were watery, and her mouth was tight, like she was trying to control something. I thought she was just being sentimental about her daughter getting married. I thought this was going to be one of those moments that mothers and daughters have, one of those moments that becomes part of the fabric of your relationship. Instead, she said, "Isabel, I need to tell you something before you get married. And I need you to listen to me without interrupting until I'm done." Something in her voice made me pay attention. This wasn't the tone of someone about to share sentimental wisdom. This was the tone of someone about to say something difficult, something they'd been carrying for a long time. I felt fear curl up in my stomach, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what she was about to tell me. "Robert isn't your biological father," she said. The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but they didn't connect to anything in my brain. I couldn't make sense of the sentence. Robert wasn't my biological father. But Robert was my father. Robert had always been my father. He was the only father I'd ever known. "What do you mean?" I finally asked. My mother took a breath. She was crying now, tears running down her face. She held onto my hand like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She told me that she'd had an affair before she married Robert. She told me that she'd gotten pregnant with me as a result of that affair. She told me that she'd decided to have me, and that Robert had married her knowing about the pregnancy, knowing about me, knowing that I wasn't biologically his child. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like the room was tilting. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my body, watching a version of me sitting in a bridal suite, getting ready for her wedding, while her mother told her that her entire identity was a lie. "Who is my biological father?" I asked. "His name is Michael," my mother said. "His name is Michael, and he's someone I loved very much when I was young. But he wasn't in a place to be in a serious relationship, and I made a decision." "What kind of decision?" I asked. My mother explained that she'd gotten pregnant, and Michael had wanted to be involved, but that she'd chosen not to tell him that she was pregnant. She'd made the decision to have me and to raise me, but she'd decided not to inform the biological father. She'd decided that Robert would be my father instead. "Does Michael know about me?" I asked. "No," my mother said. "I never told him. He doesn't know that you exist." The weight of that statement crashed over me. Somewhere out there was a man named Michael who had no idea that he'd fathered a child. Somewhere out there was a man who was my biological father in a genetic sense, but who had no idea that I existed. Somewhere out there was a person who was literally half of my DNA, and he had no idea. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why today? Why did this have to be today?" My mother said that she'd been carrying this secret her entire life, that it had been eating her alive, that she couldn't let me get married without knowing the truth about who I was. She says that she felt like she'd been lying to me my whole life, and she couldn't do it anymore. She said that marriage was a beginning, and she wanted me to begin this chapter of my life knowing the truth about myself. "Your father doesn't know I'm telling you this?" I asked. "He knows I'm planning to tell you," my mother said. "He wanted me to wait. He didn't think today was the right day, but I couldn't keep this secret any longer." I looked at myself in the mirror. I was looking at the same person I'd been looking at all morning, but everything had changed. The person in the mirror had a different father now. The person in the mirror didn't know where she came from. The person in the mirror was someone she'd never been before. "I need to be alone," I said. My mother asked if I wanted her to stay, if I wanted to talk about it more, if I wanted to process this together. I told her no. I told her that I needed time to think, that we could talk about this later, that right now I needed to be alone with this information. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed in my undergarments, and I cried. I cried harder than I'd cried in years. I cried because everything was wrong. I cried because my entire life had been built on a foundation of secrecy. I cried because the man I'd called Dad my entire life wasn't actually my biological father. I cried because my mother had made a choice that had reverberated through my entire existence. I cried because somewhere out there was a man named Michael who didn't know I existed. I also cried because I was furious. I was furious at my mother for telling me this today, for choosing my wedding day to finally unbind herself from this secret. I was furious that she'd kept this from me my entire life. I was furious that she'd made a decision about my life without giving me any choice in the matter. I was furious that she'd decided that today, of all days, was the day I needed to know. But underneath the fury and the shock and the devastation, there was also a strange sense of clarity. So much of my life suddenly made sense in a different way. I'd always felt slightly disconnected from my mother in some ways. I'd always felt like my father understood me better, even though we weren't biologically related. I'd always felt like there was something I was missing, some piece of myself that I didn't understand. Now I knew what that was. I was missing the other half of my genetic code. I was missing Michael. I checked the clock on the vanity. It was 12:30. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock. I had an hour and a half to process the fact that my biological father was someone I'd never met, that my identity was completely different from what I'd thought it was, and that I still had to walk down the aisle and marry Daniel and pretend that everything was normal. I took a shower. I don't remember deciding to take a shower, but I did. I let the hot water run over me, and I tried to wash away the feeling of unreality that was surrounding me. I tried to feel normal again, but I couldn't. I felt like I was living in some kind of alternate universe where nothing was what it seemed. When I got out of the shower, my bridesmaids were back in the suite. They asked me if I was okay, and I told them I was just nervous about the ceremony. They believed me, or they pretended to believe me. They helped me into my dress. They fixed my makeup where it had run from crying. They told me that I looked beautiful. And I looked in the mirror, and I saw a beautiful bride. But underneath the beauty, I saw a girl whose entire world had just been turned upside down. My father came to escort me downstairs. He knocked on the bridal suite door, and I called out for him to come in. He entered in his tuxedo, and he looked so handsome, so proud, so happy. He looked at me with the same love he'd always looked at me with, and I felt something break inside me. This man had raised me. This man had loved me unconditionally. This man was about to walk me down the aisle, and he wasn't my biological father. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. I wanted to ask him how he could look at me with so much love when he knew the truth about who I was. I wanted to ask him if he'd resented raising me, if he'd felt like I was a burden, if he'd ever regretted marrying my mother. But I didn't ask any of those things. Instead, I said, "Thank you for always being my father." He looked at me strangely. He asked if something was wrong. I told him no, that I was just emotional about getting married. I told him that I loved him. He hugged me, and he held me for a long time, and I held on to him like he was the only thing keeping me grounded in reality. "I love you too, Isabel," he said. "You know that, right? No matter what, I love you." The way he said it made me wonder if he knew that my mother had told me. I wondered if my mother had told him that she was going to tell me. But I didn't ask. I just held on to him and tried not to cry. He offered me his arm, and I took it, and we walked down the stairs together. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests were already seated. My fiancé was waiting at the altar. The photographer was positioned to capture the moment. And I was walking down the stairs on the arm of the man who'd raised me, knowing that he wasn't my biological father, knowing that I was walking toward a marriage while carrying a secret that I didn't know how to process. The doors opened, and the music started. My father and I walked into the chapel. All 200 guests turned to look at me. They smiled. They were happy for me. They had no idea that everything about my life had changed in the past hour and a half. They had no idea that the bride they were looking at was a completely different person than the one they'd known her whole life. My fiancé, Daniel, was standing at the altar with tears in his eyes. He looked at me like I was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He looked at me like he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life with me. He had no idea that I was someone different than the person he'd asked to marry him. He had no idea that my identity had just been fundamentally altered. My father and I reached the altar. He kissed my cheek. He shook Daniel's hand. He took his seat, and I was standing there in my wedding dress, about to get married to the love of my life, and I felt like I was living someone else's life. The ceremony was beautiful. The pastor said beautiful things about marriage and commitment and building a life together. Daniel said his vows, and they were perfect, and he cried, and everyone cried. And then it was my turn to say my vows, and I had to think about what it meant to stand in front of 200 people and commit to building a life with someone when you'd just learned that your entire identity was built on a secret. I said my vows. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember meaning every single one of them. I remember looking at Daniel and thinking that he was the only person in that room who didn't know that my world had just been turned upside down. I remember wanting to tell him, to pull him aside and explain everything, but knowing that I couldn't. Not now. Not today. Today was supposed to be about celebration, and I couldn't ruin that by telling him that his bride was someone different than he'd thought she was. We exchanged rings. The pastor pronounced us married. Daniel kissed me, and the entire congregation erupted in applause. And I felt completely disconnected from the moment, like I was watching someone else get married, like I was a ghost observing someone else's wedding. The reception was held in a ballroom adjacent to the chapel. There was a cocktail hour while guests mingled, and I had to walk around the room and greet people, and accept their congratulations, and pretend that everything was normal. I had to hug my mother while secretly being furious at her. I had to smile at my father while feeling devastated that he wasn't my biological father. I had to act like a happy bride when I felt like my entire world had been destroyed. During the reception, I danced with my father. The DJ had announced the father-daughter dance, and we moved to the dance floor while everyone watched. My father held me gently, and he asked if I was okay. I asked him if my mother had told him that she was going to tell me. He said yes. He said that my mother had told him this morning that she was planning to tell me before the ceremony. He said that he'd asked her to wait, that he didn't think today was the right day, but that my mother felt like she couldn't carry the secret anymore. "I'm sorry she told you like that," he said. "You deserved better than that. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because your mother asked me not to, and because I didn't want you to feel like you were less as in mine. You are mine, Isabel. Biologically or not, you are my daughter. You have always been my daughter." I cried during that dance. I cried while my father held me and everyone watched. And my father held me while I cried, and he didn't ask questions, and he didn't try to comfort me with words. He just held me and let me process. And I felt the weight of his love for me, the weight of a man who'd chosen to raise a child that wasn't biologically his, who'd loved me unconditionally my entire life. "Thank you," I said to him. "Thank you for being my father." "Always," he said. After the reception, Daniel and I went back to our hotel suite. We were supposed to consummate our marriage, to begin our new life together as husband and wife. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend to be happy. I couldn't pretend that everything was normal. I sat on the edge of the bed in my nightgown, and I told Daniel everything. I told him about my mother coming into the bridal suite. I told him about finding out that Robert wasn't my biological father. I told him about Michael, about the secret, about feeling like my entire identity had been a lie. And I cried while I told him, and Daniel held me, and he listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he asked me what he could do to help. That question broke me in a different way. Because Daniel, my husband of 3 hours, was asking me how he could help me process the fact that my life had been completely altered. He was asking me what I needed, and I didn't have an answer because I didn't know what I needed. Over the next weeks and months, I had many conversations with my mother. We sat down with a therapist, actually, because I needed help processing everything that had happened. My mother explained more about Michael, about their relationship, about why she'd decided not to tell him about the pregnancy. She told me that she'd loved him, but that he'd been in a complicated place in his life, and she'd made a decision that she had to live with. "Do you regret having me?" I asked her once. "No," she said immediately. "Never. Having you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You are the greatest gift of my life." "Do you regret not telling Michael?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Yes, many times, but it's too late to change that now." I also had another conversation with my father, my actual father, the man who'd raised me. I asked him what it was like, knowing that I wasn't biologically his, but loving me anyway. He said, "Love isn't about biology. Love is a choice. I chose to love you from the moment I knew you existed." I chose to show up for you every single day. I chose to be your father in every way that mattered. Biology is just DNA. But fatherhood is so much more than that. He also said something that I've held on to ever since. He said, Isabel, the fact that I'm not your biological father doesn't make me any less your father. But it also doesn't make me more your father. It's just a fact about your life. It doesn't change anything about who you are or how much I love you. And gradually, I started to understand what he meant. Michael being my biological father didn't make my relationship with my father any less real. It didn't make me any less his daughter. It just meant that there was another piece of my genetic puzzle that I didn't have access to. It meant that I had another story, another narrative, another part of my history that I didn't fully understand. A few months after the wedding, I made a decision. I decided that I wanted to try to find Michael. I decided that I wanted to know who he was, what he looked like, what kind of person would have been my biological father if circumstances had been different. I hired a genealogist to help me, and we started searching. It took about 6 months, but we found him. Michael was living in California. He was a businessman successful, with a wife and 2 adult children. My half-siblings. I had half-siblings that I'd never known about. I spent a long time deciding whether to reach out to him. I wrote him a letter 100 times. I drafted emails that I never sent. I thought about calling him. And finally, one day, I just did it. I called him. The conversation was strange and awkward and emotional. He was shocked to hear from me. He was shocked to learn that I existed. And he was devastated that my mother had never told him. He said that he would have wanted to be involved, that he would have wanted to know his daughter. He asked if I wanted to meet him. I said that I did, but that I needed time. I needed time to process the fact that he existed, that I had a biological father, that I had half-siblings. I needed time to figure out what kind of relationship I wanted to have with them, if any. We did eventually meet, about a year after that first phone call. I flew to California, and I met Michael and his wife and my half-siblings. It was strange and wonderful and complicated. Michael looked like me in some ways. I could see my own features reflected in his face. We had things in common, ways of thinking that felt similar, and yet he was also a complete stranger. But I'm grateful that I found him. I'm grateful that I know who he is, and I'm grateful that I also have Robert, the man who raised me, the man who chose to be my father, the man who loves me unconditionally. What I've learned from this experience is that family is more complicated than I thought it was. Family is not just biology. Family is the people who choose to love you, who choose to raise you, who choose to show up for you, day after day, year after year. My father chose to be my father. And that choice means more to me now than it ever did before. My mother's secret nearly cost me the relationship with my father that I'd taken for granted my entire life. But it didn't, because my father was strong enough to weather it, because his love for me was strong enough to transcend the truth about my biology. And my mother's secret also gave me another father, another family, another part of my history. It's complicated, and it's messy, but it's also beautiful in its own way. And my wedding day, which was supposed to be the day I became someone's wife, became the day I discovered who I really was. It became the day my entire understanding of identity shifted. It became the day I learned that family is what you make it, not what genetics determines. My father still talks about walking me down the aisle as one of his proudest moments. He still tells people that I'm his daughter, without any hesitation, without any qualification. And I am. I am his daughter. I am also Michael's biological daughter. I am also the daughter of my mother's choice and my father's love. I am all of these things at once, and none of them diminishes the others. That's my story. One secret kept for 29 years. One revelation shared at the worst possible time. One identity completely transformed and then painstakingly rebuilt. One family that fractured and then slowly healed. And one father who loved me so completely that biology didn't matter.